it feels a bit funny coming back onto social media after you've been on hiatus for a bit. I mean, I think I'm just chronically online because it hasn't even been that long. But nonetheless, today I want to talk about 10 signs that you might be neurodivergent. So, as a registered clinical counselor, I talk to a lot of people who are neurotypical and a lot of people who are neurodivergent. Now, one thing stands true, and that is when you're an ethnic minority, usually you kind of fly under the radar in terms of teachers noticing that you might be neurodivergent, or even your own family members, just because they're not educated or informed about these kind of things. Even doctors and nurses, or even counselors might miss it, especially if you're an 80s, 90s, or early 2000s kid. There's still that kind of stigma and stereotype that, oh, perhaps that child is quiet or shy because they're ESL or because this is their culture. That gets amplified even more in terms of misdiagnosis for when you're a female. So just kind of keeping that in note and in the back of your mind as we go through this list of 10 signs. Now, first and foremost, you may have missed these subtle cues because in South Asian culture and other cultures as well, we tend to be a little overly critical of our offspring. So the offspring internalize that voice as their inner voice, so they're more likely to have a negativity bias towards themselves and notice all their shortcomings and really attribute it to personal flaws rather than their psychology or their neurobiology. So number one, what are we always told as South Asian kids? Stand up straight, speak with a smile and a confident voice, and make eye contact. Easier said than done when you're neurodivergent. So sign number one, eye contact feels intense or unnatural. So if you notice you're always looking at someone's nose when they're talking, or you're looking everywhere but their face and their eyes, then this might be a sign. This alone is not a diagnosis that you have autism or that you're neurodivergent. It's just something to consider. If, since you were a kid, you found it hard to look people in the eye when you were talking to them, or when they were trying to find your eyes, you were kind of avoiding eye contact, then this might be a sign of neurodivergence. Number two, you love routine and predictability. Knowing what to expect means you're not going to have sensory overload. Your window of tolerance, the bandwidth for how much distress you can handle on a daily basis, won't be narrowed, and it makes you feel like you have more control over the ongoings. Now, neurodivergent individuals tend to experience something called sensory overload. So that means they have cast a wider net for what they're taking in. So if you can be prepared for what your routine is going to be, that means you're going to be prepared for what you're going to be exposed to and what type of environment you're going to be in. So the nervous system for neurodivergent individuals loves predictability because that means we can brace ourselves. That means we can know how to be able to handle the different triggers and activations rather than constantly being caught off guard and having to pivot and almost have our nervous system hyper aroused because now we haven't mentally prepared for how we're going to cope with all these things. Number three, sensory sensitivity. So I know it's become kind of like a trend to say, don't turn on the big light, don't only use soft yellow lighting, and being someone who's aware that they get sensory overload. But for neurodivergent people, it's almost like it's getting under your skin. It's very, very distressing to have bright lights or loud sounds, or even to have people around you speaking in a louder tone of voice. So what you hear, smell, taste, what you feel, all your senses have a little bit of a lower threshold for what is deemed overwhelming. And what ends up happening is when you become flooded, you can become dysregulated. When we're dysregulated, we can either go into fight mode, which is then we're reactive, irritable, we're then becoming snappy or mean, or flight mode, we got to get the heck out of there. We're like, pronto, get me out. This is too overstimulating. There's too much going on. Or freeze. a fan favorite for us Punjabi girls, where we just kind of shut down, disassociate. We're there, but not really there, and we're quiet. Now, here's a caveat I really want to mention. Unfortunately, because of stereotype and bias, when individuals are noticing that you're either in fight mode, flight mode, or freeze mode, they will attribute it to being a personality flaw. They will say she's too chakki hoi, or she has an anger problem, or she just thinks she's too good for us and that's why she's being quiet or off-standish. So they won't attribute what's going on with you to be something that's actually psychological and actually very, very distressing. Instead, they'll attribute it to being a character flaw or the way you've been raised or something more personal, and it becomes more of a commentary on who you are as a person rather than what you're dealing with as a person. There's a flip side to this. Not only can sensory input be painful and activating, sometimes other kinds of sensory input can be regulating. So fidget toys, certain scents, certain sounds can actually bring down the nervous system and have a calming and soothing effect. Hence why there's this big craze for those squishies. What are they called? Oh gosh, they're surrounded. My house is filled with them. Neatos and those dumplings, all that stuff, because our world is generally more overstimulating than before, more now than ever. So everybody can use a little bit of that regulation. But for individuals who are neurodivergent, they tend to, those types of things tend to appeal to them all that much more because they need that kind of texture and that tactile soothing in order to come down a few notches. Again, this is such a trending term, and now everyone and their uncle seems to think they're on the spectrum. I'm not trying to say that in an offensive way, but we hear these terms being thrown around like hyperfixation. This is my latest hyperfixation. So yes, you can have that in a colloquial manner, but also when you're neurodivergent, hyperfixations are a lot more intense than that, and we can think of them also as special interests. So an individual who is neurodivergent will often have a special interest that they don't realize that they're talking about excessively, or that they're almost obsessively interested in that special interest, be it a particular sport, hobby. For me, it's psychology. That worked out, didn't it? So they don't realize that maybe their passion or their vigor can become a little overbearing and a little excessive. So they don't have that reference point of like, am I going on about this too much? Is everyone else not as excited as I am about this topic? So special interests can also be the way that they funnel all their dysregulation and their negative affect and their insecure thoughts or feelings and their anxieties and their stress, because it's kind of like a funnel, right? It's the one way or avenue that they're able to express themselves or feel relief. So this one is more if you're further along on the spectrum, like have more symptoms and it's a little bit stronger, your neurodivergence, but taking things literally. So there's a lot of idioms in the English language, right? Like, it's raining cats and dogs, or can you give me a hand with that? My daughter just did an assignment on this and I had them at the top of my head, but now they're gone. I have really bad brain fog lately. That's another reason I haven't been recording, but side note. But so idioms, all those things that are like literal, not literal, but kind of like just sayings. Individuals who are neurodivergent will sometimes have a tough time with those. Like, you're being a pain in the neck, and then they'll be like, well, but I'm not touching your neck. So just recognizing that sometimes a person's not being argumentative, or they're not being problematic, they're not being sanctimonious or kind of passive aggressive. They literally are taking what you're saying literally. They don't have that ability to decipher and see the double meaning behind the saying. That's just a little bit missing for individuals who are neurodivergent. We've, again, another trending term on social media for the last decade or so, social battery. So individuals who are neurodivergent end up masking in order to fit in. So they'll mimic or copy social behaviors. They're really good at that because it feels good to be neurotypical because we're wired to not stand out, to not be different. So very often we will exert a lot of energy and overabundance of energy trying to copy social cues or to try to mimic the way people are walking, talking, behaving with one another, and reading people and then following suit and exhibiting similar behaviors as those around us takes a lot of energy. So often then when they don't have to mask, let's say at home, if it's a child, they may exhibit unruly behavior because they're so tired of masking all day. Or if it's an adult, sometimes the same thing. We can all act like big kids sometimes. Or you crash and you kind of just need to snooze and rest and really lay low. And that's where things like sensory blankets or like quiet rooms or quiet time, laying down with a eye mask and in a dark room can really be appealing for individuals who are neurodivergent, because what is socially, let's say, typical for a neurotypical person, like being in a conversation, going to work, being at school, it's just kind of par for the course and they're not even giving things a second thought. But for a neurodivergent individual, so many tabs are open all the time. They're tracking and copying and exhibiting that much more energy than their neurotypical counterpart. So then that means they're going to get more tired than those individuals and need more downtime to recharge as well. So sometimes communication style can be a little bit different, where either they'll be very quiet or they'll be oversharing. So sometimes the pacing and the back and forth is a little hard to gauge for individuals with neurodivergence. So you might, again, in our South Asian culture, because we're not well informed about these things, we'll dub them as rude or arrogant if there's talking over you or they're interjecting and they're not responding and listening to actually hear you and respond, but more so because they don't have that ability or that wiring or that functioning. Their back and forth dialogue is a little bit different from someone neurotypical. So just being aware that sometimes we're labeling people with the completely wrong labels, where in reality, they're just neurodivergent. Just to add to that last note about communication, small talk can be painful. So they can really dread like simple pleasantries like hello, thank you, you're welcome, goodbye, how's the weather talk. It's just so activating for individuals, not all, but sometimes with individuals with neurodivergence. But then when they get going about their special interest, it all just kind of gets rolling, and then maybe they're talking too much and they're not recognizing when they're giving an appropriate amount of time for the other party to engage in the conversation as well. There can also be a tendency to be monotone or have flat affect. And also some of these things are exasperated if they're not feeling safe with in the certain environment. So some people they might feel comfortable with, so they won't be, let's say, having the flat affect or oversharing or being too quiet. And other people they might feel a little bit activated or uncomfortable around or different environments. So certain things exasperate the symptoms and the behaviors as well. Okay, this is a big one. Executive functioning tasks feel harder than they should be. What executive functioning is basically a part in your prefrontal cortex, which is about strategizing, sequencing, to-do lists, planning, admin stuff, scheduling. All that stuff seems harder than it should be. For example, if my appointment's at 2 o'clock, then I need to leave the house at 1:45, and I need to that was an unrealistic time frame because we live in the lower mainland and you ain't getting nowhere if you're leaving 15 minutes before. But see what I mean? I can't do the time sequencing. But you get what I'm trying to say. Like basically all your administrative tasks, like momming is very hard. You might end up double booking yourself a lot. You might, oh, light bulb moment. Okay, I often have issues with my admin in my work and my scheduling, but okay, I'm getting sidetracked. So all those types of things, because that part of the brain maybe needs a little bit more resourcing and support, are a little more challenging for individuals who are neurodivergent. Second to last, there is a strong sense of justice, and things can often be viewed in black and white. So I don't know if you guys noticed, but I like to get up on my soapbox a lot. And nothing grinds my gears and gets me more riled up than seeing things about sexism, racism, social injustice. So individuals who are neurodivergent will have a little bit of extra kick when it comes to being triggered by these types of things. In addition to that, sometimes we are a little more inflated with something called our cognitive distortions, which are common thinking errors. For example, catastrophizing, seeing things in black and white, seeing things in terms of all or nothing. So being really cognizant of that when you're either reflecting upon your own self or interacting with someone who is neurodivergent or that you suspect might be, that they might not be able to see gray areas, and they'll think someone is either all good or all bad, or a situation is either all good or all bad, or they might not be able to see the duality with something. So they will often kind of think of like, well, no, you didn't come to my birthday party, so that must mean you're not my friend anymore. So there's no ability to kind of do the emotional detective work and zoom out and be like, what are the other variables here? And is this circumstance more nuanced than it's originally appearing to be? And last but not least, this word came up in session this week. I can't even say it properly, so I'm just gonna write it here. But essentially, it's the inability to name your emotions, process your emotions, and acknowledge them. So again, this is a little bit of a tendency that occurs with individuals with stronger neurodivergence who are a little bit further along into the spectrum than others. But sometimes neurodivergent individuals can have a tough time knowing what they're feeling. What am I feeling? What am I feeling? How am I feeling it? Why am I feeling it? Where is it coming from? Will more so just experience the dysregulation piece. None of this is set in stone. That's why there's counseling, therapy, there's resources, but nothing will change if we don't have self-awareness and educate ourselves about this and become well-informed, because there is nothing worse than being a child who is getting in trouble for something that's out of their control. So when you have your little kid who doesn't want to put on that itchy dress, or when you have your teen who wants to have their headphones on all the time, or when you have a sister-in-law, a daughter-in-law, or a cousin or a friend who you are labeling in a certain manner, try to do the deeper, insightful, emotional detective work of, hey, is there maybe something going on that is out of his or her control? And last but not least, use this information to be power for your journey for self-love, self-exploration, and self-understanding, as well as healing. I hope you guys found this insightful and helpful. I know for myself, massive light bulb moment in learning more about autism later in life. I think there's still a long ways to go, just even in general society when it comes to this topic, but especially in our South Asian families, in our homes, there needs to be much more understanding about this kind of stuff. As usual, thank you guys for watching. See you next time.